We'll start with the latest on the investigation into the death of Ann Widdecombe this morning. A 28-year-old man who was held on suspicion of murder has been re-arrested on suspicion of the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, made a statement in the Commons yesterday.
Counterterrorism policing have now taken the lead in the investigation. As Lawrence Taylor, the head of National Counterterrorism Policing, has said, and I quote, "We now have new information and evidence that means counter-terrorism policing is leading the investigation. We are pursuing multiple lines of inquiry to establish the motivation for this attack." The police now have a suspect in custody, a 28-year-old white British man, and I can confirm to the House that this man was not known to prevent.
This was quite a shocking moment when the news of this broke, I think, because the involvement of counter-terrorism police in the investigation is a very significant change. On Sunday, the Devon and Cornwall Police Assistant Chief Constable said there was no information to suggest terrorism and nothing to suggest it was politically motivated. He said that point twice over the couple of days in the immediate aftermath of the death. On Times Radio Drive, the independent reviewer of terrorism, Jonathan Hall, KC, criticised the way the police have communicated about the case.
I don't understand why Devon and Cornwall Police were steering the public away from the idea that this was a terrorist case, and I don't know why they didn't simply say they had an open mind as the motivation. And I think they probably broke one of the golden rules of investigations, which is not to comment on live investigations in case new facts emerge.
Another line that has emerged is that Ann Widdecombe's home was featured in detail on a TV auction show that aired less than a week before her death. Her Dartmoor home appeared on Celebrity Yorkshire Auction House on July the 2nd on the Quest TV channel. Well, the Times newsroom reporter Ollie Cole joins us now. Good morning, Ollie.
Morning, Kate.
So the investigation has changed fairly significantly in the last 24 hours. We heard some of that from Shabana Mahmood in the House of Commons. Do we have any understanding of why that has changed?
Well, what's really interesting about this is we know that counter-terror police, I believe Devon and Cornwall Police said that they were assisting inquiries way back on Friday, but that they retained primacy over the investigation, so that Devon and Cornwall were leading things. But obviously there is often an operational need in circumstances like this to bring in other parts of policing infrastructure from across the country where they might have more resources or perhaps a bit more specialism in these cases. But from what we understand, after the arrest of this 28-year-old man, we have obviously had the police go into his home, obviously spoken to him and attempted to assess what is going through his mind, and that shift was quite dramatic yesterday lunchtime. You know, we went essentially from the police not ruling out terror or political motivation, but not, emphasising it, to suddenly this sort of quite big about turn. And there is quite a big question for the police today, as you heard from Jonathan Hall there, as to where that emphasis lay. Obviously, these things do move, these things do change. But, the emphasis on keeping an open mind, on the idea that things can move and can change, wasn't necessarily put in place. And that means, not only, initially there was perhaps a thought that counter-terror policing were taking over because of, the widespread nature, the resourcing, the fact that this was a difficult investigation, which sometimes counter-terror are better placed to do. But the fact that this person has been re-arrested on suspicion of the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terror suggests that that's where, the evidence is leading police in their inquiries at the moment. But it's been, as you say, sort of remarkable when you think that actually we heard about this on Friday morning. It turns out that the police were aware of it the day before, and Widdecombe, we understand, died on Wednesday lunchtime, and yet now, by Tuesday morning, the investigation seems to have turned on its head almost entirely from what the emphasis was from the police.
And Ollie, you can see, can't you, in the way that the police have dealt with this particular case, that they have tried to learn lessons from other cases. For example, coming out very quickly and talking about this being a white British male that they've arrested. Now, that's because in previous cases, the police had refused to state the nationality or the ethnicity of an offender, which fueled questions in local communities about where people had come from. And that led to this kind of political tension. So you can see that they are trying to change the way they operate. How forgiving, though, are people broadly in society, but also in politics, of the police in this instance?
Well, I think you're right. I think in terms of, changing the way they do it, it has moved quite significantly over the last couple of years. I mean, you remember there was quite a lot of, outpouring after what happened at the Liverpool bus parade, after Southport, things like that, where there was sort of sanctioning from the Home Secretary and from police chiefs to say, look, you do need to get some of this information out far more quickly, and you need to be a bit more transparent about this, because if you don't, you sort of create this vacuum that people feed into. Now, the issue is, I think, and this is what Jonathan Hall was sort of talking about there, is there is an understanding generally that police will want to come out and say something. If they say nothing, it simply feeds into this sort of, black hole of information. However, there is a question over how they emphasise that information. It's quite clear that if you say, for example, that, we're keeping an open mind, but there is nothing to suggest this is politically motivated, and there is currently nothing to suggest that this is a terror investigation or terror linked, that the words "we're keeping an open mind" sort of get lost along the way while you say things like that. And so actually there will be questions here as to how the police emphasise what they say, how they actually keep the public up to date on investigations like this when it is true that these things do move and do change. It's worth noting that Devon and Cornwall police actually fairly consistently are rated pretty inadequate on things like investigating crime and leadership and force management by the inspectorate. So there are questions over how this specific force handles this as well. But I think there is a reality that these things do move, but I think by feeding out information that ends up not being quite right, you're sort of causing yourself another problem further down the line.
Just finally, Ollie, Nigel Farage is going to meet with security experts, and the Home Secretary was very clear about the fact that this is not a political decision about the security that the MPs and others receive. Do we know when we can expect that meeting and what Reform UK hope to come out of it?
Well, we saw that Nigel Farage accepted it last night on social media. I would imagine that that's going to happen fairly quickly. It's probably in the interests of both Reform and Nigel Farage, and also the government, to ensure that meeting takes place quickly, because as we know, there have been quite a lot of accusations levelled at both the government, but also the House of Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle, who will want to get that issue sorted and pretty, flat out done and dusted as quickly as possible. It must be said, we do spend quite a lot of money on MP security, and a lot of this stuff happens behind closed doors, often for security reasons. It's not laid out exactly what people have. But you'll recall, Kate, when we had the new intake of MPs in 2024, there was a mocked-up constituency office door in Portcullis House in Westminster, which had alarm systems on it, which showed, how those security measures happened, and all MPs were able to access that. The government spent another, I think it was about 32 million pounds on specific MP security. But obviously the nature of this doesn't just go to MPs themselves, because Ann Widdecombe at the time wasn't really a frontline politician. So Nigel Farage will also want to take up that conversation to talk about how Reform politicians and politicians in the public realm are protected more widely.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, I have no doubt. Ollie, thank you very much.
Thanks.
That is Ollie Cole there, the Times newsroom reporter.
There is a political angle to this as well, which is Reform have been making the case for the last, couple of weeks, indeed probably last couple of years, that the establishment is in opposition to Reform. And when they say things, the establishment closes ranks and refuses to listen to them. And so they were saying we need to make sure whether we need to test whether this has been a political aspect to this death or not. And they would say that Devon and Cornwall police refused to listen to them and then have now changed their mind. So the narrative that Reform are saying very regularly, it's establishment versus Reform. They're saying it again in connection to this case as well.
And I think we have to question whether or not that's true, in the sense that police are never able or willing to give the public all the information that they have. And they may not have all the information at the very first moment. I mean, they often don't.
And it might have changed over the course of the investigation.
And it does change. So I think the question is about how you communicate the instability of an early stage police investigation in a way that is both transparent but also, crucially, doesn't prejudice a later trial, because we know that police have to really be very careful about what they release and what they don't. And there have been many people who work within policing saying, look, if we put CCTV out in the public domain too early, it may hamper our ability to find a witness. It may put people at risk. It may mean that we can't follow or use that particular line of inquiry in a later case. And of course, if you're talking about the difference between successful prosecution of somebody who has done something wrong versus telling the public in the very moment, of course, on balance, you're going to choose the alternative.
But therefore they should have.
You have to be able to explain it.
And Jonathan Hall said, then you just say, we don't know. If you don't know, don't say you don't know. Don't say there's no evidence to suggest a political motive, because that could come back and if evidence then subsequently appears.
And I suspect the reason they feel the need to give more information is because the police have been under huge amounts of pressure recently for failing to give information, which they did have in a timely fashion.
And lots of people online are trying to make their own theories. So they're trying to push back against that as well, which I do understand. But you end up here, which is... to people who want to think of this way, they feel this is another example of the establishment acting in a certain way which reinforces their view they have on the country.